Through the narrow crack of the break room door, I froze. Steam from my coffee curled into the cold air. And then I heard it. In flawless Cantonese, my boss, Richard Hale, said to the regional director, "We'll replace him by Friday." My fingers tightened around the paper cup. He didn't know I'd lived in Hong Kong for years. He didn't know I understood every single word. In that moment, the fluorescent lights above felt colder. The hum of the vending machine turned into a low growl in my ears. And every memory of the last 7 years, the late nights, the weekends, the problems I fixed for him, they all burned in the pit of my stomach. He thought he was speaking in a language that kept me locked out. What he didn't know was that he'd just let me in. I stepped back, heart steady, mind sharper than it had been in months. This wasn't going to be just the end of my job. It was going to be the start of my story. A story where the man who thought he could erase me would watch everything he built crumble in his own hands. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, stay with me until the end. And if you want more real revenge stories where justice isn't just a word, join this channel. Because today, Richard Hale is about to learn that I don't forgive and I don't forget. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 41 years old, and for the last 7 years, I've been the senior quality control engineer at a medical equipment plant here in Austin, Texas. Every morning, I park my beat-up blue Ford in the same spot by the loading dock. I grab a large black coffee from the diner across the street, no sugar, no cream, and walk past the hum of forklifts and the smell of fresh-cut steel. It's routine, comforting, the kind of rhythm that makes you believe things are steady, safe. I've always believed in hard work, the kind that doesn't show up in flashy presentations, but in machines that run smoother products, that pass inspection the first time, and customers who never see the problems you fixed before they started. When the pandemic hit, I pulled doubles for months so no shipment missed a deadline. When new hires struggled, I stayed late to train them. I've been the guy who covers shifts, smooths over client complaints, and makes sure we keep the contracts that keep this place alive. Some people chase promotions. I've always chased stability. And maybe that's why I never saw the cracks forming until it was too late. Back then, I thought Richard Hale, my boss, valued my loyalty. I thought my place here was secure, but looking back now, I realized he was already laying the groundwork to replace me. The plant in Austin isn't glamorous. It's steel beams, concrete floors, and the constant hum of machinery shaping parts for life-saving devices. But I've always liked it that way. From my office window, I can see the assembly lines moving like clockwork rows of operators in blue smocks. The hiss of compressed air, the steady clang of metal against metal. Every station is a link in a chain that ends in a hospital room with a patient who never knows my name, but trusts the device their life depends on. Richard Hale's office sits above it all glass walls, overlooking the floor. When I first started, he was the kind of boss who walked the line, shook hands, asked about your kids. He taught me the ins and outs of the business, how to keep both the American executives and our overseas owners happy. Back then, I thought he was a mentor. The company had been acquired 5 years ago by a corporate group in Shenzhen. The change brought new technology, bigger orders, and more politics. Meetings started happening behind closed doors. Emails came in languages most of the team couldn't read. I didn't mind. I had my work, my systems, my results. But small things started to shift. Projects I'd normally lead went to others. I was left off calls I used to run. And whenever I glanced at Richard's calendar, there were more and more strategic meetings with the regional director. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Now I know better. It was early March when Richard called me into his office. He had that salesman's smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Mike, meet Ethan Miles," he said, motioning to a tall kid in a crisp white shirt and an expensive watch. "Fresh out of Yale. Bright future ahead. He's gonna shadow you for a while." Ethan stood, shook my hand firmly. 27 maybe. Hair perfectly in place, posture straight, like he'd been taught by someone who cared about appearances. I've trained plenty of new hires over the years. Usually they came in wide-eyed, nervous, eager to prove themselves. Ethan was different, confident, too confident. Within a week, I noticed little things. Richard dropping by my office to ask how the training was going, not in passing, but with pointed interest. Ethan getting access to files most new hires wouldn't see for months. Private chats between the two of them ending with Richard's hand on his shoulder, like a father proud of his son. Still, I told myself it was just a new approach. Maybe Richard wanted fresh energy in the department. I'd been here long enough to know the company needed both experience and new blood. But one afternoon, as I walked past the conference room, I caught sight of Ethan sitting in Richard's chair, going through vendor reports like he'd been doing it for years. And Richard He was watching him with the kind of approval I hadn't seen in a long time, at least not directed at me. Most people at the plant think I'm just another American engineer who's never left Texas. That's fine with me. Let them think that. What they don't know is that I spent 5 years living in Hong Kong when my father took an overseas assignment. Back then I was 16, bored and eager to blend in. So I learned, not just the language Cantonese and a fair bit of Mandarin, but the way people speak when they think no one else understands. The pauses, the careful phrasing, the things left unsaid. It's a skill I've kept quiet about for decades. In every job I've ever had, I've tucked it away like a card you only play once. Because once people know you understand, they stop showing you who they really are. Richard didn't know. Neither did Ethan. So when I saw those strategic meetings on Richard's calendar with the regional director from Shenzhen, I didn't think much of it at first. Corporate politics, not my lane. Then one Tuesday morning, I walked past the break room and froze. Richard's voice speaking rapid Cantonese rolled out into the hallway. I caught enough to know it wasn't small talk. It was about me. He'll finish training Ethan by the end of the month. Then we can move forward without him. I didn't make a sound. Just kept walking, coffee in hand, face calm. Inside, something shifted. That card I'd kept hidden all these years, it was finally time to play it. The next time it happened, I didn't just keep walking. I stayed. It was Thursday morning. The plant already buzzing with the start of shift noise forklifts, beeping metal, clanging the low thrum of compressors. I was heading for the vending machine when I heard it again. Richard's voice in Cantonese, low but sharp, coming from the conference room. Once Ethan's training is done, we'll phase Michael out. No drama. Severance package, good reference, nothing to make him fight it. The regional director's voice followed calmer, almost amused. Make sure he hands over everything, vendor lists, client contact, system access. We can't have loose ends. I stood just beyond the doorway, out of sight. The hum of the soda machine masked my breathing. Every word cut a little deeper. 7 years of loyalty reduced to a bullet point in some efficiency plan. No mention of the systems I built, the audits. I passed the problems I solved before they became disasters. To them, I was just a cost to be trimmed. I let them finish, waited for the shuffle of papers and the closing of laptops. Then I walked away, coffee in hand, face blank. On the surface, I was still the dependable Michael Carter, but inside something cold had settled in. This wasn't going to be a quiet exit. If Richard thought he was playing chess, he hadn't seen my board yet. That afternoon, Richard stopped by my desk. "Mike, how's Ethan coming along?" He leaned against the cubicle wall, casual, but his eyes were measuring me. I forced a smile. He's picking things up fast. I'll make sure he learns everything. Richard nodded, satisfied. He thought he was in control. From that moment, I decided my best weapon would be patience. I followed his training schedule to the letter, walked Ethan through every system, every checklist, every vendor relationship. If Richard wanted me to hand over my knowledge, I'd do it. But I'd also be building something he didn't see coming. Each evening after Ethan left, I stayed late. Not to finish reports, but to make copies. System logs, vendor invoices, approval chains. Anything with Richard's name on it went into a private drive, encrypted, backed up twice. I kept my demeanor exactly the same during the day. Dependable, cooperative, the model employee. When Richard passed my desk, I'd even give him progress updates on Ethan, as if I were proud of the kid's growth. Inside, though, I was cataloging every red flag, every shortcut, every time Richard bypassed protocol. If this was a game, I was no longer a pawn. I was the guy taking notes on every move the king made, waiting for the perfect time to knock him off the board. One Friday night, the plant was almost empty. The production floor had gone quiet, and the only light in the office came from my monitor. I was digging through vendor payment records, part of a training exercise Richard had assigned Ethan. On paper, it looked routine, but the numbers didn't feel right. There were invoices from companies I'd never heard of, vague descriptions like consulting services and equipment calibration, amounts just small enough to fly under the radar, 5,000 here, 8,000 there. every single one approved by Richard. I cross-checked them against our inventory logs. No matching equipment, no service records, nothing. Scrolling further back, I saw a pattern. These payments had been happening for over 2 years, right after the Shenzhen group took over, and the frequency had doubled in the last 12 months. It was deliberate, calculated, the kind of scheme you could run for years if no one looked too closely. I copied everything: invoices, approval emails, bank transaction summaries, and dropped them into my encrypted drive. Then I sat back in my chair staring at Richard's glass-walled office across the floor. He thought I was training his golden boy. What I was really doing was building the case that would burn him to the ground. Over the next week, the pieces started to fit together. Richard's sudden interest in strategic meetings, the way Ethan had been fast-tracked into access he hadn't earned, the quiet removal of my responsibilities one project at a time. It wasn't just about replacing me. It was about clearing the one person in this plant who might recognize what he was doing. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Ethan wasn't just a promising hire, he was the perfect bridge. Young, ambitious, fluent in Mandarin from his semester abroad in Beijing. Someone Richard could present to the Shenzhen executives as his right-hand man. Someone who could navigate the cultural and language gaps and make Richard look indispensable. Once I was gone, there'd be no one left with both the technical knowledge and the linguistic skills to question his special vendor relationships. He could run his scheme unchecked, expanding it across multiple facilities if he got the regional promotion he'd been hinting at. It was smart, I'll give him that, but it also made his weakness obvious. He was betting everything on the assumption that I'd go quietly. I sat in my office late that night, the plant floor dark and silent below. The reflection of Richard's office glowed faintly in the glass, and I made myself a promise: if he wanted a bridge to Shenzhen, I'd be the fire that burned it down. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Ethan knocked on my office door. He looked uneasy, not the confident kid Richard had been parading around for weeks. "Mike, can I ask you something off the record?" he said, glancing over his shoulder before stepping inside. I nodded, motioning for him to close the door. He sat down, lowering his voice. "Some of these vendor invoices Richard had me approve, they don't match the equipment coming in, and there are payments going to companies I can't find anywhere online." I studied his face. No smirk, no arrogance, just genuine confusion, and maybe a little fear. "You've been here long enough to know our approval process, right?" I asked. He nodded. "And you know those vendors should have gone through at least 2 verification steps." "Exactly," he said. "But Richard told me to just sign off and not ask questions. Said it was expedited protocol for trusted suppliers." I leaned back in my chair, hiding the small spark of satisfaction burning in my chest. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just Richard's golden boy. He was a witness. "Keep doing what he asks," I told him. "But keep copies of everything. Every email. Every invoice. Someday soon you might need them." He left my office quieter than he'd come in. And I knew the cracks in Richard's plan were starting to show. 2 days later, Richard called me into his office. He had a printed quality report spread out on his desk, red marks slashed across the pages. "Mike, this is unacceptable," he said, sliding the report toward me. "These figures are way off. If corporate saw this, they'd think we're asleep at the wheel." I scanned the pages. The numbers didn't make sense. Failure rates, inflated delivery dates, misaligned inspection data, missing. It wasn't my report. It had my name on it, but I'd never touched these files. "This isn't my work," I said flatly. Richard leaned back in his chair, pretending to be sympathetic. "Look, I know you've got a lot on your plate. Mistakes happen. Let's just fix it before the wrong people see it." Wrong people? Like Shenzhen. Like the board. It hit me then, this wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. A neat little paper trail to paint me as sloppy, maybe even negligent. The perfect justification to cut me loose. I took the report, nodded like I was accepting fault. Inside, my pulse was steady, my mind sharper than ever. If Richard wanted to play dirty, fine. I'd let him think he'd landed a hit, but I was already planning the counterpunch one that would make this little stunt look like child's play. Friday evening, just as I was packing up, Ethan appeared at my door. His expression was tight, jaw set, eyes darting like he'd been looking over his shoulder all day. "Mike, we need to talk," he said. I shut the door. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and slid it across my desk. It was an email chain between Richard and a vendor I'd never seen before. No company logo, just a generic Gmail address. Richard told me to forward these invoices directly to him for payment, Ethan whispered. He said they were part of a fast-track deal with one of our overseas partners, but I checked this vendor doesn't exist in our database. I scanned the messages. The tone was casual, almost friendly, like two people who'd been working a side hustle for years. And then buried in one reply from Richard, once Carter's gone, we can streamline all approvals through you. Ethan's voice was low but firm. I think he's using me to cover his tracks. I don't want to be part of this. For the first time, I saw the shift in Ethan's eyes from Richard's protege to someone standing on my side of the line. I folded the paper, slipped it into my folder of evidence, and met his gaze. Good. Then let's make sure we end this together. The following Thursday, the air in the plant felt different. The Shenzhen regional director was scheduled to arrive that afternoon, and Richard had been pacing like a man rehearsing his acceptance speech. By noon, I saw his calendar, a 2-hour strategic session blocked off with the director. No engineers, no oversight, just the perfect window to secure his promotion and lock in his scheme. That morning, Richard stopped by my office. Mike, after today, things are going to move quickly, he said, voice dripping with false sincerity. Ethan's integration has been better than I expected. We're transitioning some responsibilities. Nothing personal. I gave him the same calm nod I'd practiced for weeks. Inside, every muscle was coiled. I had my evidence folder prepped, invoices, email chains, vendor lists all linked to accounts that weren't in our system. And now with Ethan's testimony, the case was bulletproof. The plan was simple. Wait for Richard to get comfortable in that glass-walled conference room, thinking he owned the day, and then walk in with the truth. As the afternoon light slanted through the factory windows, I watched Richard greet the director at the door, switching effortlessly into Mandarin. Smiles, handshakes. They disappeared into the conference room. I glanced at the clock. 30 minutes. That was all I'd give them before I ended this. 30 minutes later, I walked to the conference room. The blinds were half closed, but I could see Richard leaning forward, speaking rapid Mandarin to the regional director. He was smiling that smug, self-satisfied grin I'd learned to hate. I knocked once. Richard opened the door, irritation in his eyes. Mike were in the middle of switching to flawless Mandarin. I addressed the director directly. Sir, I have evidence of unauthorized vendor payments and falsified expense reports, all approved by Mr. Hale. The room froze. The director's eyes snapped to me, shock flickering into suspicion. You speak Mandarin, he asked in his language. Fluently, I replied, and I've understood every conversation you've had with him, including the ones about firing me once I finished training Ethan. I stepped inside and laid the folder on the table. Invoices, bank records, emails with fake vendors, all connected back to Richard's personal accounts. Richard stammered, tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but Ethan appeared at the doorway. Everything in that folder is real. I've seen it. He told me to push those approvals through. The director leafed through the documents, his face darkening with each page. Finally, he closed the folder and turned to Richard. Leave. Now. Security arrived within minutes. As they walked him out past the production floor, I caught his eye, and for the first time, Richard looked small. 3 months later, Richard Hale pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, 4 years in federal prison, restitution that would strip him of every dollar he'd stolen. I was offered his position the week after he was escorted out. I accepted, but on my terms. Transparent financial controls, quarterly third-party audits, no single person holding unchecked power. The first time I stood in that glass-walled office, I looked down at the production floor. The same machines, the same operators, the same steady hum of honest work. The difference was knowing no one was quietly bleeding the company dry. Ethan stayed on and under proper oversight. He turned out to be a solid engineer. We didn't talk much about Richard after that, but I think we both carried the same lesson. Silence can protect you or destroy you. As for me, I kept my language skills quiet again, not because I feared another Richard, but because sometimes the most powerful advantage is the one no one knows you have. If you've made it this far, you probably enjoy seeing justice served cold. So stick around. Hit that subscribe button because there are more stories like this, and some might make you wonder what's really being said behind closed doors. Looking back, I realized this was never just about Richard. It was about every time I'd seen someone like my father, loyal, hardworking, walked out with a cardboard box because someone else saw an opportunity. Richard thought he was clever. He thought language was a wall that kept him safe. But walls keep secrets only until someone knows how to listen. I learned that silence is a double-edged sword. It can give you time to prepare, or it can let someone bury you without a sound. The trick is knowing when to break it. People sometimes ask me if it felt good watching security walk Richard out. It did, but what felt better was knowing the company and the people who depend on it were safe from someone willing to trade integrity for personal gain. Now when I walk the floor in Austin, I see the same hum of machines, the same focus on every operator's face. But I also see something else: trust, because they know if someone tries to game the system again, there's at least one person here who won't stay quiet. So if you've been through something similar, if you've had someone underestimate you, remember the best revenge is making sure they never get the chance to do it again. And if you want to hear more stories like this, where the quiet ones turn the tables, subscribe. You never know, the next one might feel a little too close to home.